The sun was setting over the jagged mountains of Naxnash, casting long shadows over the toxic jungle below. The wind carried a faint sulfuric scent, mingling with the dust kicked up by the towering alien trees. Isaac Cross stood on the balcony of his small engineering quarters, watching the storm clouds swirl in the distance. The planet had always felt foreign to him. After all, he wasn't supposed to be here. Humans had never been meant to exist among these creatures. Yet here he was, part of the Naxnashian war effort, helping them build better defenses against the empire that threatened their planet. It had been a strange, uncomfortable partnership from the start. The Naxnashians were strong, resilient, but their technology was primitive compared to the vast alien forces they were up against. They'd called for human assistance after their initial defeat, and Isaac, a former soldier turned engineer, had answered the call. His knowledge of machinery and warfare, though humble compared to some, was enough to make him indispensable. But today, Isaac wasn't thinking about the war. He wasn't thinking about engines or armor. Today, his thoughts were focused on something far more personal, something that reminded him of a time before Naxnash, before war. Kestra, the young cadet, was about to undergo the trial. The trial was a brutal rite of passage for every Naxnashian youth. It was a survival challenge set deep in the heart of the planet's most dangerous regions. The cadet would be sent out alone with nothing but their wits and a few basic supplies. They had to survive for 30 days, no help, no backup. Every cadet before Kestra had perished. Every single one. Isaac had heard the stories, had seen the young Naxnashians train, fight, and prepare. But Kestra was different. She was young, barely 16 cycles old, but there was fire in her eyes. She reminded him of himself back when he was a soldier, unwavering, determined, even though he knew the odds were stacked against him. He saw in her a kind of hope that, despite the cold reality of the situation, refused to die. His communicator buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. A message from Commander Zhen, the highest-ranking Naxnashian officer overseeing the trial. Isaac, your presence is requested. The cadet's trial begins at dawn. Your expertise will be needed. Isaac's stomach churned. It wasn't the first time he had been asked to help prepare the cadets. His knowledge of survival tactics had been put to use before, though never this personally. Kestra wasn't just another cadet. She was different. And now he was being asked to watch her face what so many others had before her, a fate he didn't want to imagine. He turned off the communicator, grabbed his jacket, and left his quarters. The air outside was thick with moisture, but the wind had died down. The looming peaks of Naxnash stood like silent sentinels in the distance. Isaac's boots crunched against the dirt as he made his way to the training grounds, the headquarters where cadets were prepared for the trial. The place smelled of sweat, metal, and something else, something primal. At the edge of the clearing, he found Kestra, her silhouette framed by the burning horizon. She stood tall, her face steely and unyielding, though Isaac could see the tremor in her hands as she adjusted her gear. "You ready?" Isaac called, his voice calm, but his eyes betraying the concern he felt. Kestra turned, her bright green eyes locking with his. "I have to be." Isaac took a deep breath. He knew the weight of those words all too well. "You know what happens out there, right? The trial is." "I know," she cut him off, her voice soft but firm. "But I'm not afraid of it, not anymore." Isaac studied her for a moment. In that brief glance, he saw everything. The resilience, the doubt, the fear that she tried to hide beneath her bravado. It was the same fear every soldier, every warrior had when they faced the unknown. He wanted to warn her, to tell her that no one had ever survived. But instead, he said, "Just remember you're not alone. Whatever happens, you're not alone." Kestra nodded. "I'll survive, I have to." Behind them, Commander Zhen approached. His tall, imposing frame loomed like a shadow against the setting sun. He walked with the air of someone who had seen far too many young cadets meet their end. His cold, amber eyes studied Isaac and Kestra, knowing full well the weight of the moment. "Sergeant Cross," Zhen said, his voice crisp. "It's time, the trial begins." Isaac nodded, his throat tightening. Kestra's fate was sealed. She would enter the wilds tomorrow with nothing but her skills and the brutal laws of survival to guide her. But Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that this year's trial was different. He couldn't help but wonder if Kestra, like every cadet before her, would return with her boots dripping red. The words echoed in his mind as the night stretched on, but no answer would come. Not yet. The sun had barely risen when Kestra was led to the edge of the wilds. Isaac stood in the back of the group, watching her, his heart heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. Behind her, the rest of the cadets stood with stiff postures, their eyes focused forward, none daring to acknowledge the fear that clung to their hearts like a second skin. The trial had become a solemn ritual, and today it was more than just a test of survival. It was an exhibition. Isaac clenched his fists, frustrated with the politics of the situation. The higher-ranking officers from the invader faction were standing behind him, their cold eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding. The Naxnashians were trying to prove something to them, something that made Isaac's stomach twist. He had seen these invaders before, their sleek ships hovering in the distance, their alien, almost inhuman demeanor glaring down on the Naxnashians. They were a powerful empire, and to them, the Naxnashians were little more than a primitive people with nothing but traditions that they found amusing. Isaac felt a sharp pang of resentment. The Naxnashians were anything but primitive. They had endured the harshest of conditions on their planet, adapted to a world full of dangers that would break most other species in a matter of days. But none of that mattered to the invaders. They were here to watch, to observe, to judge. Kestra stood before them now, her face unreadable. The only thing that showed her nerves was the slight twitch of her fingers gripping the knife at her side. She was ready. She had to be. Without a word, the group of cadets led by Kestra began their trek into the wilds. Isaac watched as they disappeared into the dense jungle, their figures swallowed by the vast, untamed land. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the faint sulfuric burn of the planet's unique atmosphere. The ground was slick with moisture, and the trees loomed like giants, their twisted, blackened branches reaching down like claws. The trial had begun. Isaac turned away, knowing there was nothing he could do now. He had prepared Kestra as best as he could, offering subtle advice, teaching her small tricks that could help her survive. But beyond that, she was on her own. The Naxnashians believed in the purity of survival. They saw it as a test of personal strength and resolve, a way of proving oneself to the planet and its people. But Isaac knew the truth. It wasn't just a test of strength, it was a death sentence. And Kestra, like all the others before her, was facing it alone. The wilds. The jungle was alive. The air buzzed with the sound of strange creatures, the flicker of lights flashing between the trees. It was an alien world, yet it felt familiar in the way nature always does. A place that could both nurture and destroy without hesitation. Kestra felt it immediately as she moved deeper into the jungle, her senses heightened by the harsh, unfamiliar environment. Every step she took felt heavier than the last. The gravity of the trial pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible weight. She knew the stakes. Survive the wilds for 30 days and she would return a hero, her name forever etched into the history of Naxnash. Fail, and she would become just another casualty, lost to the jungle like the others before her. But there was something else, something gnawing at the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't truly alone. It wasn't the creatures that stalked the jungle or the sounds of distant predators that kept her on edge. It was the subtle hints, small things she noticed out of the corner of her eye, the brief rustle of leaves that didn't seem to match the wind. At first, she brushed it off. It was just nerves. But as the hours stretched on, the feeling grew stronger. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. Isaac's observations. Isaac paced nervously at the edge of the jungle. The invaders were watching, their cold eyes fixated on the group of cadets as they made their way through the treacherous terrain. He knew they were hopping to see a failure, a disaster, a moment that would prove to them that Naxnash was weak, that their traditions were no more than foolish rituals. Isaac couldn't bear it. It was one thing to let the Naxnashians fight their own battles, but to have outsiders, invaders, watching them, judging them like this was unbearable. It felt wrong. The whole trial had been turned into a spectacle, a game for the invaders to enjoy at the expense of the Naxnashian youth. He couldn't let it go on. Kestra deserved more than this. Isaac's communicator beeped again, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Jean, brief and direct. We are monitoring. Ensure the cadets are not assisted. The trial is sacred. Isaac's jaw clenched. The Naxnashian commander's words were clear, and Isaac knew that interfering would mean severe consequences. But could he just stand by and let Kestra die? Let all of them die for the sake of tradition. His eyes drifted back to the jungle. The feeling in his chest grew stronger. He couldn't do nothing. He turned away, heading for the command center. He needed to make a decision. The first night. Night came quickly in the jungle. The oppressive darkness descended with a quiet, suffocating weight. Kestra huddled beneath a thick tangle of vines, her senses alert. The jungle had come alive with sounds, far-off roars, the rustling of leaves, and the hiss of unseen creatures slithering through the underbrush. She had built a shelter, a small refuge from the elements, but it was a temporary fix. The real challenge wasn't the weather or the night. It was the creatures that roamed these lands, things far worse than the stories told in training. Kestra's heart raced as the sounds grew closer. She had to stay quiet, stay hidden. The trees above her rustled, and she dared not breathe too loudly. The jungle was alive, and she was just a small piece of it, a speck in the vastness of Naxanash. The hours passed slowly, but Kestra did not sleep. Her thoughts swirled with doubt. Was she truly prepared for this? Was she strong enough to survive? Suddenly, a low growl broke the silence. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. Kestra's heart hammered in her chest, each beat reverberating through her limbs like the tremors of an earthquake. The creature in front of her was massive, its body dark and spiny, with scales that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, narrowing as it studied her, its massive jaws parting with a low, rumbling growl. She had only moments before it decided to strike. Her hand tightened around the hilt of the knife at her side. She had trained for this moment. She had been taught to use everything in her environment as a weapon. But this creature, it was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. It was a predator from the deepest parts of the jungle where no one dared venture. No cadet had ever survived an encounter like this. Kestra swallowed her fear and shifted slowly, trying to make herself smaller, less of a target. The creature's gaze never wavered, its body tensed, ready to pounce. In the back of her mind, Kestra could hear Isaac's voice, a memory of their last conversation ringing through her thoughts. Remember, use your wits, not just your strength. Survival is about adapting, thinking in ways the predator doesn't expect. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the jungle for anything she could use. The tree branches overhead were thick with vines, and the ground beneath her was scattered with rocks and sharp, jagged stones. Nothing was ideal. Nothing was a guarantee. The creature lunged suddenly, its speed almost blinding. Kestra barely had time to react, rolling to her side, narrowly avoiding its claws that slashed through the air with a hiss. The ground beneath her shook as the creature landed heavily, its eyes flashing with rage. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she scrambled to her feet. The trial had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back now. She didn't have time to think. She moved on pure instinct, darting for the nearest tree, her heart racing as the creature pursued her. She heard it close behind, its heavy breath hot on her neck, its claws scratching against the earth. Her fingers brushed the jagged rocks beneath the tree, and without thinking, she snatched one up, hurling it as hard as she could at the creature's glowing eyes. The stone struck the side of its head, causing it to stagger backward. For a brief moment, it reeled, disoriented. Kestra seized the opportunity, scrambling up the tree with all the speed she could muster, her hands slick with sweat as she gripped the thick vines above her. The creature howled in fury, its voice a guttural growl that echoed through the jungle. It was relentless, following her every move, its body slithering up the tree after her. Kestra's thoughts raced, but she couldn't let panic take over. She had been trained for this. She was strong, she was prepared. But the creature wasn't the only danger out here. The jungle itself was alive, with every step offering new threats. She had to find a way to outsmart this creature to survive. Isaac's intervention. Back at the edge of the jungle, Isaac stood behind a rock, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding through his binoculars. His heart was in his throat as he watched Kestra struggle against the creature. He couldn't allow it. He couldn't let her die out there. His mind raced, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to intervene. The rules, however, were clear. He had no right to help. The trial was a sacred Naxnashian tradition. It was a test of their strength and resolve, a rite of passage that had been passed down for generations. Isaac had seen enough to understand that he had been brought in to help with their war effort, not to disrupt their ways. But this wasn't war. This was a trial where lives were lost, cadets were sacrificed for the sake of tradition. Isaac's fist clenched around his communicator, his thumb hovering over the button to alert the command center. They wouldn't allow him to break the rules, not even to save a life. But what if Kestra does survive? His fingers trembled as he stared at the image of the creature stalking its prey. He couldn't let it happen. Not again. The Naxnashians had lost so many of their own to the wilds. To let Kestra face this alone, knowing what the trial truly meant, was unthinkable. Isaac made up his mind. He glanced once more at the higher-ranking invaders standing nearby, their cold eyes fixed on the scene, as though they were watching a show. Isaac had seen them before, alien beings who viewed everything through the lens of superiority. They saw the Naxnashians as nothing more than a primitive species. He couldn't let them win. Not like this. With one swift motion, Isaac activated his emergency comms and sent a covert signal. He tapped into the local military network, bypassing the rules that bound him. "Across to Kestra," he muttered under his breath. "I'm coming, hang on." Kestra's struggle. Kestra's body ached with every movement as she scrambled higher up the tree, the creature just inches behind her. Her fingers were slick with sweat, and her heart hammered in her chest like a drum, but she forced herself to focus. She had been training for years for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer ferocity of the creature. It wasn't just the physical strength she needed, it was the mental fortitude. She had to think like a hunter. She had to outwit this creature, and she couldn't let fear take over. The creature snapped at her legs, its jaws narrowly missing her foot. The smell of its breath was rank, sulfuric, and foul. Kestra gritted her teeth and pushed herself harder, until finally she reached a branch thick enough to support her weight. She took a deep breath and with one swift movement swung herself to the next branch, using her legs to launch herself upward. For a moment she was safe, but not for long. The creature let out a screech, its frustration mounting. It swung its massive claws at the tree, shaking it with such force that Kestra's grip faltered. Her heart skipped a beat as she fought to hold on. "Don't let go, don't let go, don't let go." Her thoughts were a blur, but there was no room for panic now. The only thing that mattered was survival, and she would survive. She had to. Kestra's heart skipped a beat as the rope tightened around the base of the branch where she clung, her fingers numbing from the effort. She barely had time to process the unexpected intervention before she was pulled sharply upward. The creature's screeching growl echoed through the trees as it recoiled from the force of its failed assault. Her eyes scanned the shadows, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it an ally? Was it Isaac? But she couldn't see him. Her chest tightened with anxiety. The last thing she needed was more confusion in the middle of a fight for her life. She was yanked higher still, her limbs straining as the rope pulled taut. Without thinking, Kestra grabbed onto the line and climbed. Her breath ragged as she hauled herself to safety. A final, desperate pull sent her crashing into the thick branches above, her feet landing with a solid thud on the sturdy wood of a tree's massive limb. The rope was gone. The creature's growls began to fade into the distance as it retreated, sensing that the battle had changed. Kestra's body trembled from the sudden rush of adrenaline, but she forced herself to steady her breath. Isaac, she whispered into the communicator, her voice shaking. There was no response. The jungle around her was quiet now, save for the faint sound of distant rustling, but she knew that it wouldn't last. The wilds were never quiet for long. She quickly assessed her surroundings. She had to keep moving, or else the creature would find her again. The higher ground might give her a moment's respite, but it wouldn't last. The trial wasn't just about surviving predators. It was about testing her resolve, pushing her to the limits of endurance. And Kestra was beginning to understand the cruel truth. Surviving the trial wasn't enough. Isaac's sudden appearance was no mistake. Whoever had helped her wasn't just watching from afar, they were actively intervening. But why? Isaac had warned her that no one would help her. This was a test. This was supposed to be her proving ground. But now everything was blurred. Every step was complicated by the realization that the trial had changed, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what came next. Isaac's decision. Back at the command center, Isaac's pulse raced as he stared at his communicator, the signals flickering. His intervention had worked, but for how long? He had no idea how Kestra would respond to the rope pulling her out of danger, or if the higher-ranking officers had noticed his breach of protocol. He couldn't afford to wait around and find out. The Naxnashians, even though they respected tradition, would never question their strict codes openly. But Isaac was in a different position. He wasn't bound by the same laws. His loyalty to humanity and survival ran deeper than the rules of an alien race, no matter how well-intentioned those rules might be. His communicator buzzed again. A new message from Commander Zhen. Cross, you violated protocol. Do not interfere again. Do you understand the consequences? Isaac's jaw clenched as he read the message. Consequences. The Naxnashians were asking him to watch cadets die for the sake of a ritual they knew would cost lives. What was the point in keeping the trial sacred if it meant slaughtering young lives to uphold an outdated tradition? He stood, packing the cramped room, knowing there was no turning back now. He had crossed a line, and if the command center wanted him out, they would have to drag him back kicking and screaming. But no matter what the Naxnashians said, Kestra would survive. He wasn't about to watch another death unfold under the guise of tradition. Kestra's dilemma. Kestra was a mix of relief and confusion. She had been pulled out of the creature's grasp, but now she wasn't sure if that help was a blessing or a curse. The trial was supposed to be a test of everything she had been trained for, her strength, her survival instincts. But this wasn't the trial she had been preparing for. She stumbled through the branches, trying to regain her bearings. The jungle was unnervingly silent now. The sounds of creatures rustling in the underbrush had died down, and the air felt too still. For a moment, she wondered if she was truly alone. The communicator buzzed again, and Kestra stiffened. It was Isaac's voice. Keep moving, he said, his voice barely a whisper through the static. I'm watching. You're not alone. Kestra's heart skipped. Isaac. He had been the one to help her. But why? He had made it clear before that no one would interfere, that the trial was hers to survive or fail. And yet here he was, a ghost in the shadows, guiding her. His words gave her hope, but they also filled her with a creeping unease. You're breaking the rules, Isaac, she muttered under her breath. She wanted to scream. She had been trained to do this on her own, to survive the trial on her own. But now the lines between survival and dishonor were blurry. Isaac had helped her once, but could she trust him again? Should she? Kestra's gaze drifted back to the thick jungle ahead. The trial was about more than surviving. It was about proving herself to the Naxnashians, to the invaders who were watching. But Isaac's help had shown her another side, one that spoke of humanity's compassion, its adaptability. She didn't know how to reconcile that with the unforgiving reality of the trial, but she knew one thing: she had to survive. The weight of that realization sank in her chest like a stone. I'll do this, she whispered. I'll survive, but I'll do it my way. The trial, true face, As Kestra moved deeper into the jungle, her thoughts raced. She couldn't escape the creeping doubt gnawing at her. The creature wasn't the only danger here. There were worse things, things that the trial had never prepared her for. What was the true nature of the trial? Was it meant to test her strength, her endurance? Or was it something else, something darker? The way the Naxnashians and the invaders viewed it now, it wasn't just a test of survival. It was a way to prove a point, to make a spectacle out of the cadets, to show the invaders that the Naxnashians were still strong. But strength wasn't enough. Kestra stopped in her tracks as the sounds of distant voices reached her ears. Low murmurs. The air around her seemed to grow heavier, as if the very jungle was holding its breath. She wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't just the creatures of the jungle watching her. It was them, the invaders. Kestra's heart pounded in her chest as she crouched in the underbrush, her eyes scanning the shadows. The invaders were close. She could feel the weight of their presence, a looming threat that filled the air with tension. The once pristine jungle now felt like a maze of danger, every step fraught with uncertainty. She had thought the trial was the greatest challenge she would face. But now the truth was clear. The trial was just the beginning. What had been a rite of passage had become a weapon, a tool used by the invaders to gauge the Naxnashian people's worth. They didn't care about the traditions of her people. They didn't care about survival. They only cared about what they could take. Kestra's mind raced. Isaac had warned her that this wasn't just about surviving the jungle. It wasn't even about her, at least not anymore. She wasn't just proving herself to the Naxnashians. She was proving something to the invaders, a message they intended to send to the galaxy. Her eyes flicked to the horizon. The invaders were circling, their footsteps soft but deliberate. They were no longer just observing. They were actively hunting, waiting for the moment when they could strike, when they could show the Naxnashians that their traditions meant nothing. Kestra clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the knife in her hand. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was a battle for her people's dignity, and that meant she couldn't back down. She had to survive, not just for herself, but for Naxnash. Isaac's dilemma. Back at the command center, Isaac's frustration was boiling over. He had been watching Kestra through his hidden cameras, tracking her every move. But now the situation had escalated beyond what he could have anticipated. The invaders were closing in on her, and he had no idea how to stop it. The whole thing had spiraled out of control. The trial was no longer about tradition. It was a way to show the invaders that the Naxnashians had strength, resilience, and pride. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that the Naxnashians were under siege, and their traditions had been twisted into something far more sinister. Isaac stood in front of the main console, his fingers hovering over the buttons that would allow him to intervene. He knew the risks. He had already broken the rules once. The Naxnashian military would have no mercy if they found out he had been helping Kestra. But what were the alternatives? Let her die. Let her become just another casualty in a trial that had already claimed too many lives. He clenched his fists. There was no way he could live with that. I won't let her die, Isaac muttered to himself, the words sharp and final. He activated the communicator, sending a single message to Kestra. I'm coming. Stay hidden, stay alive. For a brief moment, the silence that followed was deafening. Then, Kestra's voice crackled through the static. Isaac, I can't do this. I can't win this trial and protect my people. They're watching. They're hunting me. It's not just the creatures. It's them. Isaac's heart sank. She knew, she understood now. And worse, the trial had already become a game, one where survival wasn't enough. She had to fight back. Kestra's choice. Kestra's breath came in short bursts as she crouched lower in the jungle. The invaders. Voices now so close she could almost reach out and touch them. They were close, too close. She had to move. She had to get away before they found her, before they realized she had been hiding all this time. The knife in her hand felt heavy. She wasn't just holding a weapon anymore. She was holding a symbol of everything she had been trained to do, everything she had been taught to become. The Naxnashians didn't fight with weapons alone. They fought with tradition. They fought with honor. They fought with the knowledge that no one, no matter how powerful, could take away their right to exist. But these invaders, they were different. They didn't care about honor. They didn't care about tradition. They only cared about dominance, control, and power. Kestra's fingers trembled as she gripped the knife tighter. She had a choice now, a choice she hadn't expected to have. She could run. She could hide. She could try to survive the trial in the way she had been taught, adhering to tradition, letting the jungle decide her fate. But that wasn't enough anymore. She couldn't just survive. She had to fight back. She had to show the invaders that they were wrong. That Naxnash wasn't a world to be conquered. It was a world worth saving. Kestra slowly rose from her crouch, her body tense with the decision she had made. The knife was no longer just a tool, it was her message. She was no longer a cadet in the trial. She was a warrior, and warriors didn't hide, they fought. The hunt begins. The jungle was alive with sound as Kestra stepped forward, her every movement calculated, deliberate. The invaders had underestimated her. They thought they could toy with her, use her for their amusement, test her strength in a trial they had already decided the outcome for. But they were wrong. Kestra moved quickly, silently, her eyes flicking between the shadows. The invaders were still close, but she was no longer the hunted. She was the hunter. She crept through the trees, positioning herself above the clearing where the invaders had set up camp. There were 3 of them, their sleek forms blending into the jungle, their weapons at the ready. They were methodical, disciplined, as if they had done this 100 times before. But they had never encountered a Naxnashian like her. She waited. The first invader moved into position. He was a tall creature with black scales that shimmered in the dim light. Kestra's heart raced as she lined up her shot, her mind focused on the task at hand. She couldn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. With one swift movement, she launched herself from the tree, her knife glinting in the moonlight as it struck the invader in the back. He fell without a sound. Kestra's heart hammered in her chest as the remaining invaders advanced. The air around her seemed to thicken, every muscle in her body taut with the sudden rush of danger. She had taken one down, but the fight was far from over. There were still 2 of them, and they were better armed, better trained, and far more dangerous than anything she had faced so far. The invaders, their sleek forms barely visible in the dark jungle, spread out, their weapons drawn. Kestra's fingers clenched around her knife, the cold metal a small comfort against the uncertainty of what came next. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. She quickly scanned the terrain. She was outnumbered and outgunned. The invaders were tactical, their movements calculated as they advanced in perfect synchrony, flanking her from all sides. The jungle was quiet now, the buzzing insects and distant roars of predators silenced by the intensity of the moment. She had no time to waste. The first invader, the one to her left, raised his weapon, and in that moment, Kestra knew she had only one option: strike before they could strike her. With a sudden, explosive motion, Kestra lunged from her position in the tree, flipping and twisting through the air. Her knife was a blur, slicing through the air as she aimed for the invader's throat. He managed to parry the attack, but the force of her strike sent him staggering back off balance. Her feet hit the ground with a soft thud, and she was already moving, ducking behind a thick cluster of vines. The second invader followed her every move, but Kestra was faster. Her mind honed in on the survival instinct she had cultivated for so long. The invaders were now within striking distance. Kestra's breath was steady, but her body was pushing past its limits. She could feel the exhaustion creeping in, the toll of the trial of the fight wearing on her. But she couldn't stop. Not now, not when the fate of her people depended on it. The invader to her right raised his weapon, and Kestra knew this was it, the final moment. She had to move. She had to finish it. With a powerful push, Kestra darted forward, using the momentum of her run to slam into the invader, knocking him off balance. His weapon fired, but it missed. Kestra seized the opportunity, twisting the invader's arm and forcing him to drop his weapon. With a swift motion, she drove the knife into his side, her heart pounding as the invader's body crumpled to the ground. But the first invader, the one she had hit earlier, wasn't done yet. He charged from behind, tackling her to the ground with brutal force. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and for a moment everything went black. The invader's cold hands wrapped around her throat, squeezing the life out of her as he pinned her to the jungle floor. Kestra struggled, her hands clawing at his, but his grip was unyielding. Her vision began to blur as she gasped for air, the world around her spinning. This is it, she thought. This is how I die. But then through the haze she heard it, a rustling sound, a voice calling her name. Stay down, Isaac's voice whispered urgently through the communicator. Kestra's eyes shot open. The invader's grip tightened, but something inside her snapped. With a surge of adrenaline, Kestra twisted beneath the invader, using the last of her strength to drive her elbow into his ribs. The invader grunted, loosening his hold just enough for her to slip free. She reached for her knife, still gripped tightly in her hand, and in one fluid motion she plunged it into the invader's side. His body went limp, falling beside her with a sickening thud. Kestra gasped for air, her chest heaving as she pushed herself up from the bloodied ground. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. She had survived, she had fought, and she had won. But there was no time for relief. The sound of more footsteps, heavy, quick, reached her ears. More invaders were coming. Kestra's gaze shot up, her body already shifting into defensive mode. The trial had begun, and now it wasn't just about surviving, it was about protecting Naxnash, protecting everything she had fought for. Isaac's final move. Isaac's hands shook as he watched the battle unfold through his hidden cameras. He had been tracking Kestra's movements, watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. And now, with the invaders closing in on her, the moment had come. He could no longer sit back and watch. He had intervened once before, and that had cost him. He couldn't stay hidden any longer. He couldn't let Kestra face this alone. Isaac keyed in the command to activate the cloaking device on his personal suit. The Naxnashian military had been working on this technology for months, but it wasn't perfect. It was only temporary, but it was enough. Enough to get him close. Enough to give Kestra the support she needed. He strapped his weapon to his side, checked the charge on his communicator, and stepped out of the command center, heading for the jungle's edge. Kestra's stand. The invaders were closing in, their weapons raised, their eyes trained on Kestra. She stood tall despite the exhaustion, despite the pain. The trial had become something else entirely, a battle for her life and the survival of Naxnash. The jungle, once her enemy, now felt like her ally, hiding her from the eyes of the invaders as she moved like a shadow through the undergrowth. She had no weapons left, no means of defense other than her own skill, her own ingenuity. But she wasn't alone. From behind, Isaac emerged, his silhouette barely visible as he silently dispatched the remaining invaders. His weapon hummed with a low buzz as he moved with precision, taking them out one by one, leaving no trace. He was human, just like her, but together they were unstoppable. As the final invader fell, Kestra turned to Isaac, her breath shallow but steady. "Oh, we did it," she whispered. Isaac gave a small, grim smile, his eyes dark with the knowledge of what it had cost them. "Not yet," he replied. "This was just the beginning." The jungle shook with a deep, thunderous tremor. The ground beneath Kestra and Isaac's feet vibrated as something massive and unseen pushed through the dense undergrowth. For a moment, everything froze. Time itself seemed to stretch taut, as if the universe was holding its breath. Kestra's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her knife, but she knew that the weapon in her hand would do little against what was coming. Isaac, still by her side, took a step back, his eyes scanning the trees, every muscle tensed in preparation. There was no hiding this time. The invaders had been a threat, but they were nothing compared to this new danger. The jungle had been home to monstrous creatures, but none like this. The trees parted with a deafening crack as the creature emerged from the shadows. It was a towering beast, its body a massive, muscular frame of sinewy flesh and jagged spikes, each one glinting with a sharp, metallic sheen. Its eyes, a deep, glowing red, locked onto Kestra and Isaac with terrifying precision. Its breath came in slow, deliberate puffs, hot and rancid, as it advanced toward them. Isaac's jaw tightened. "It's a Threxal," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the beast's growls. "One of the planet's most dangerous predators. It's adapted to hunt in this jungle, faster, stronger than anything you've faced so far." Kestra's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. She had fought too hard, survived too much to be intimidated now. Her fingers curled tightly around the knife, her gaze fixed on the beast's glowing eyes. "We'll fight it," she said, more to herself than Isaac. She wasn't about to let this creature claim her life, or the lives of the people she had sworn to protect. Isaac didn't respond at first. He was already moving, his hand going to the weapon at his side. He was thinking, calculating the best way to take down such a creature. But then he looked at Kestra, at the determination in her eyes, and he knew there was no turning back. "We fight together," he said. "We survive together. The final battle." The Threxal roared, its massive jaws snapping shut with a sound that made the air itself shudder. Kestra and Isaac sprang into motion, working in tandem, but the creature was too fast. It lunged with shocking agility, its claws slashing through the air, aiming for Kestra. Isaac fired his weapon, a sharp, crackling burst of energy that hit the Threxal square in the chest. The creature staggered, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned its attention to Isaac, eyes blazing with fury. It wasn't just hunting them. It was enraged, driven by an instinct that could not be reasoned with. Kestra didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her knife raised, aiming for the creature's exposed underbelly. The blade sliced through its thick hide, but it wasn't enough. The Threxal howled in pain and whipped around, swiping at Kestra with its massive claws. She barely managed to duck, the claws grazing her side, but the pain shot through her like fire. She gasped, rolling to the side, her vision blurring for a moment as blood stained her clothes. Isaac moved quickly, reloading his weapon and firing again, this time hitting one of the Threxal's legs. The creature let out another deafening roar, staggering back. But still, it wasn't enough. Isaac had no time to aim for vital spots. Every move he made was a gamble. Kestra pushed herself to her feet, her body screaming in protest. She had to finish this. She had to end it. She darted toward the Threxal, dodging another swipe of its claws. With everything she had left, she thrust the knife deep into the creature's side, aiming for its heart. The Threxal shrieked in agony, its massive body convulsing with pain. But Kestra didn't stop. She twisted the blade, forcing it deeper into the creature's body. The monster's red eyes flickered with a final, desperate rage before its body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. It was over. Kestra stood over the beast, her chest heaving, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood from the Threxal stained her hands and clothes, mixing with the blood that stained her own. The pain from her wound was unbearable, but she refused to show it. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. Isaac approached her, his own body battered from the battle. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. They had survived. They had won. But at what cost? The price of victory. As the jungle slowly returned to its unnatural silence, Kestra looked at Isaac, her gaze flicking between him and the fallen creature. Her body ached, and the blood loss was starting to take its toll. She had fought for survival, and now victory was bittersweet. The trial had taken everything from her. She could feel the weight of what they had done, the cost of their actions, and she wasn't sure if the price had been worth it. The invaders were gone for now, but what had they truly achieved? Had they pushed back the invaders, or had they simply postponed the inevitable? Isaac stood beside her, his expression grim as he scanned the surrounding jungle. We've won, Kestra, but there's more to do. The fight isn't over. Kestra nodded slowly, her eyes clouded with doubt. She wasn't sure how much more she could take. The trial, the battles, the blood, it all felt like too much. But Isaac was right. The Nashians hadn't won, not yet. She looked down at the knife still in her hand, the symbol of her struggle, the symbol of everything she had fought for. She couldn't let it go. She couldn't let this sacrifice be for nothing. "Will we rebuild?" she said quietly, her voice steady. "We rebuild Naxnash, and we keep fighting for everyone who's fallen, for everyone who still believes in this world." Isaac looked at her, a slow, understanding nod passing between them. They had both been changed by this battle, by the trial. But Kestra's determination was a spark that could not be extinguished. The two of them, against all odds, had survived, together. And no matter what came next, they would fight for Naxanash. They would fight for each other.